The first thing I saw wasn't the empty display cabinet. It was my stepdaughter wearing my late mother's sapphire bracelet, like she'd owned it her whole life. She was standing in my kitchen in Carmel, Indiana, sipping iced coffee from one of my favorite mugs, scrolling through her phone like it was any other Tuesday afternoon. She glanced up and smiled. "Oh, you're home early." I dropped my suitcase beside the front door. My business trip to Chicago had ended sooner than expected after a client postponed the second day of meetings. All I'd been thinking about during the 3-hour drive home was taking a hot shower, sleeping in my own bed, and maybe ordering takeout from the little Italian place Mark and I used to love. Instead, I couldn't stop staring at that bracelet. I'd recognize it anywhere. My mother wore it every Christmas until arthritis made clasps too painful to fasten. I bought museum-quality replicas years ago for special occasions, but seeing one on Emily's wrist still made something inside me tighten. "Where did you get that?" I asked. Emily looked down casually. "This?" She lifted her wrist and admired it. "I thought it looked better on someone my age." Something about the way she said it made my stomach go cold. I walked past her toward my study. The door was already open. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the silence. Normally, sunlight bounced off the glass display cabinet along the far wall. Today, the shelves looked wrong. I stepped closer. The velvet stands were empty, every tray, every necklace stand, every ring holder gone. For a few seconds, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. I actually looked behind the cabinet as if someone might have moved everything for cleaning. Then I noticed tiny squares of dust where the jewelry boxes had sat for years. I turned around slowly. Emily. She leaned against the kitchen island. "What? Where is everything?" She shrugged. "I sold it." I laughed once, not because it was funny, because the alternative was impossible. "No." "Yes." "You didn't." "I did." She sounded almost bored. "I figured you wouldn't notice until you got back." I walked toward her. "What exactly are you talking about?" She rolled her eyes. "The jewelry, every last piece." I kept waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. My voice came out quieter than I expected. "You sold my mother's collection?" She nodded. "I found a luxury jewelry buyer in Indianapolis." My hands felt strangely numb. "Emily, I got a great price." My eyes drifted back toward the empty cabinet. Every birthday, every anniversary, every family wedding. Those pieces had been part of my life for decades, not because they were expensive, because they were hers. My mother used to tell the story behind each one. The sapphire bracelet had been bought with her first real paycheck after nursing school. The diamond brooch came from my grandfather after she survived breast cancer. The emerald necklace had been worn by 3 generations of women before me. I'd heard those stories so many times I could practically recite them. Emily took another sip of coffee. "I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of it." I looked at her. "Because they weren't yours." She gave me a smile that reminded me so much of her mother it made my heart ache. "They're family property." "No. They would have been mine eventually anyway." "No, Emily." They were just sitting there collecting dust. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Mark. Relief washed over me. Finally. I answered immediately. "Mark, where are you?" Straight to voicemail. I frowned. That wasn't possible. The call hadn't disconnected. He had declined it. Emily laughed. "Oh, they're probably too busy." "What does that mean?" She set the glass in the sink. "You really don't know?" I didn't answer. She walked a little closer until we were only a few feet apart. Then she smiled. "The jewelry paid for my mom's vacation." I stared at her. She wasn't finished. My mom and your husband are having the most amazing time in Italy. She paused just long enough to watch my face. Thanks to your jewelry. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Not because I believed every word, because I realized she wanted me to. She wanted to watch me break. She expected tears or screaming, or maybe for me to throw something. Instead, I found myself looking at her wrist again. Just the bracelet, nothing else. No diamond earrings, no emerald pendant, no ruby ring, only one piece. An odd choice for someone who claimed she'd had access to everything. Something didn't fit. She mistook my silence for defeat. You know, she said, Dad always said you cared more about that collection than about actual family. That one hurt. Not because I believed it, because I'd spent 15 years trying to prove the opposite. Private school tuition, college tuition, her first car, the security deposit on her apartment. When she got pneumonia at 16, I spent 3 nights sleeping in a hospital chair beside her. I'd never once introduced her as my stepdaughter. She always introduced me as Dad's wife. Still, I kept trying. I looked around the room one more time. Then I noticed something else. The old walnut music box my mother loved sat untouched beside the empty cabinet. Emily hadn't even opened it. I reached over and gently lifted the lid. The tiny melody drifted into the room. Emily frowned. What are you doing? I closed the lid again. Then I looked directly at her. A smile slowly crossed my face, a real one this time. She blinked. What's so funny? I picked up my phone. Because, I said quietly, the collection you sold wasn't what you think it was. The color drained from her face. For the first time since I'd walked through the front door, Emily stopped smiling. Emily stared at me for a long second, then gave a short, nervous laugh. What's that supposed to mean? I slipped my phone into my coat pocket. It means I need to make a few calls. She folded her arms. You're trying to scare me. No, I said. I'm trying very hard not to say something I'll regret. That answer unsettled her more than yelling would have. I could see it in the way she shifted her weight and tugged at the sapphire bracelet. Emily had always been comfortable around anger. Her mother used it like a weapon, and Mark handled conflict by raising his voice until everybody else gave up. Calm was unfamiliar territory. She followed me into my study. So what, they were fake? I sat down at my desk and opened the bottom drawer. I didn't say that. You basically did. I said they weren't what you thought. She let out a dramatic sigh. Claire, can we not do this weird little mind game? I already sold them. That was the first time she used my name instead of calling me Dad's wife or simply avoiding any title at all. She only did that when she wanted to sound like an adult speaking to an unreasonable child. I looked at the young woman standing in front of me, and for one painful moment, saw the 10-year-old girl I had first met. She had been sitting on the curb outside Mark's old townhouse in Fishers, her knees scraped, her brown hair tied in 2 uneven ponytails. Vanessa had been late picking her up again. Mark was inside arguing on the phone, so I sat beside Emily and offered her half of my granola bar. She didn't take it. You're not my mom, she said. I know. Then why are you here? Because you shouldn't have to wait alone. She finally took the granola bar. That was how it started. Not with some magical moment when she accepted me, just small things. Rides to soccer practice, help with science projects, sitting in the hallway when she had her wisdom teeth removed because she didn't want me in the room but also didn't want me to leave. I kept thinking patience would eventually turn into trust. Sometimes I thought it had. When Emily was 12, she made me a Mother's Day card at school. The front said, Best bonus mom ever, written in purple marker with 3 crooked hearts underneath. Vanessa found out and called Mark furious. Emily never gave me another card after that. I still had that one. It was tucked inside an old cookbook in the pantry because I had always been afraid Mark might throw it away during one of his cleaning moods. Now the same girl was wearing my mother's bracelet and telling me she had financed her father's vacation with his ex-wife. Life has a way of making you feel foolish without saying a word. Emily snapped her fingers lightly. "Hello?" I blinked and looked back at her. "Take the bracelet off." Her expression changed. "What?" "Take it off and place it on the desk." She covered it with her other hand. "I like it. It isn't yours. I told you. Dad said—" "I don't care what your father said." That stopped her. In 15 years, I had almost never spoken about Mark that way. Emily unclasped the bracelet slowly and dropped it onto the desk harder than necessary. "There. Happy?" "No." I opened my laptop. She hovered beside the chair. "You're calling the police?" "I'm calling my attorney." Her face tightened. "You seriously need a lawyer over costume jewelry?" That gave me my answer. She did not know. Not fully. Vanessa and Mark had probably told her just enough to make her useful. I logged into my email and searched for Martin Ellis's number, though I knew it by heart. He had handled my mother's estate after she died 6 years earlier. He was the kind of attorney who wore the same navy suits for 20 years and kept yellow legal pads stacked in perfect rows. Before I called, I looked at Emily. "How much did they pay you?" She looked away. "Enough." "How much?" "Why does it matter?" "Because I'm asking." She picked at one of her acrylic nails. 38,000. My eyebrows rose before I could stop them. Even as replicas, the pieces were worth far less than that. "Did they pay you the full amount?" She hesitated. "A deposit?" "How much?" 8,000. "And the rest?" "After authentication." There it was. The buyer had not finished the deal. "Who went with you?" "No one." I waited. Her eyes flicked toward the floor. "Emily." "Dad signed something." My stomach tightened again. "What did he sign?" "I don't know, some kind of ownership statement." "Where is it?" "They kept it." Of course they did. I picked up my phone and called Martin. He answered on the third ring. "Claire? Are you in the office?" "I'm leaving in 20 minutes. Why?" "I need you to stay." His voice changed immediately. "What happened?" I looked at Emily. She sold the display collection. There was silence on the line. Then Martin said, very carefully, "All of it?" "She says all of it." "Where?" "A buyer in Indianapolis. She received an $8,000 advance." Martin exhaled through his nose. "Do not call the buyer yet." "Why not?" "Because if they followed normal procedure, they've already called someone else." I glanced at the empty cabinet. "Who?" "The appraiser listed in the provenance file." I closed my eyes. That appraiser was Grace Holloway, my mother's oldest friend. Years before, Grace had cataloged every piece in the original collection. Front-back clasps, repairs, stone settings, microscopic marks. The originals went into a secure bank vault downtown. The replicas stayed at my house because after my mother died, I could not bear to look at an empty cabinet. Mark had mocked the expense. "You're paying thousands of dollars for fake jewelry to sit behind glass?" I told him it wasn't about the jewelry. He laughed. "That should have told me something." Martin continued. "Claire, listen to me. The buyer may believe they're dealing with stolen originals or fraudulent reproductions. Either way, they'll freeze the transaction." Emily's face had gone pale. I turned away from her. "What about Mark's ownership statement?" "That depends on what he signed. But he has no legal ownership of your mother's separate property, replicas or otherwise." I pressed my fingertips against my forehead. "Martin, he's in Italy with Vanessa." Another pause. This one felt heavier. "I'm sorry," he said. I hated those 2 words. They made everything real. Through the kitchen window, I could see my neighbor rolling her blue recycling bin toward the curb. A dog barked somewhere down the street. It was an ordinary afternoon in Carmel, the kind of day when people worried about dinner reservations and lawn service. Inside my house, 15 years of excuses were collapsing at once. Mark had not made one terrible decision. He had made a series of them. He resented my business trips. He complained when I paid Emily's college tuition directly instead of handing him the money. He told friends I was controlling because I kept my inheritance separate. Last winter, after too much bourbon, he admitted he was tired of being introduced as Claire Bennett's husband. I had put my hand on his arm and said, "No one sees you that way." He pulled away. "You do." At the time, I thought he was hurting. Now I wondered if he had been warning me. Martin spoke again. "I want you at my office tomorrow morning at 9. Bring the bracelet, any messages from Mark, and photographs of the cabinet." "All right." "And Claire?" "Yes?" "Change the locks tonight." I looked toward Emily. She heard him. Her mouth fell open. "You can't be serious." I ended the call. For years I had believed keeping peace meant keeping the door open. That evening, for the first time, I understood that sometimes peace begins when you finally close it. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured my mother's cabinet standing empty. Around 3 in the morning, I wandered downstairs and made myself a cup of chamomile tea. I wasn't even thirsty. I just needed something warm to hold. The house felt different. Not quieter, colder. Emily had stormed out shortly after my call with Martin, slamming the front door hard enough to rattle the framed family photos in the hallway. I didn't stop her. For years, I'd been the one chasing after everyone else. Not anymore. At exactly 8:45 the next morning, I pulled into the parking lot outside Martin Ellis's office in downtown Indianapolis. His law firm occupied the second floor of a restored brick building that overlooked Monument Circle. My mother used to joke that Martin refused to retire because he loved paperwork more than golf. His receptionist smiled sympathetically. "He's expecting you." Martin was already standing when I walked into his office. He didn't offer coffee. That alone told me how serious this was. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances," he said. "So am I." He motioned toward the conference table instead of his desk. A thick file already waited there. Beside it sat another woman I hadn't expected. Grace Holloway. She stood the moment she saw me and wrapped both arms around me. "Oh, sweetheart." That was all she said. Somehow it was enough. Grace looked older than the last time I'd seen her at Christmas. Her silver hair was shorter now, but her eyes were exactly the same. Kind, steady, the sort of eyes that had comforted me at my mother's funeral. Martin opened the file. "I'll get straight to it." He slid several photographs across the table. I immediately recognized them. Professional photographs of every piece in my mother's collection. Front, back, clasps, stone settings, even microscopic close-ups. Grace noticed my expression. "I took those 6 years ago. I remember." "We documented every scratch." Martin nodded. "And every repair." He opened another folder. "This is why." Inside were copies of insurance schedules, appraisal certificates, and inventory reports. Every single item had its own file. I knew the originals had been documented. I hadn't realized the records were this detailed. Martin looked at me. "Yesterday afternoon, before you even called me, the buyer contacted Grace." I blinked. "They already knew?" Grace smiled gently. "They knew something was wrong." Martin explained. The buyer Emily had visited wasn't some pawn shop. It specialized in estate jewelry. Whenever someone brought in a historically documented collection, the staff routinely compared it against appraisal records and provenance documents, before releasing final payment. Emily had only received an advance. The collection still had to pass authentication. It never did. The photographs didn't match. The microscopic identifying marks weren't there. Neither were several tiny restoration details almost nobody would notice unless they'd worked on the pieces themselves. The buyer stopped the transaction immediately. "What happened after that?" I asked. "They contacted the insurance company." "And then?" "The insurance company contacted Grace." I looked over at her. She folded her hands. "They were worried someone had stolen the originals from the vault." For the first time since coming home, I let out a long breath. The originals had never been in danger, not for a second. Martin leaned back. "Claire, I know." "No," his voice softened. "You don't." He slid another document toward me. "I think it's time you read your mother's letter." "My mother's—" "I've been waiting 6 years." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "When Margaret finalized her estate plan, she left instructions." He opened an envelope with my mother's familiar handwriting across the front. "For Claire, if the collection ever becomes the cause of family conflict." I swallowed hard. "I've never seen this." "Because your mother didn't want you reading it unless it became necessary." Martin handed it to me. The paper trembled in my hands. My mother's handwriting hadn't changed. Neat, gentle, exactly the way I remembered. "My darling Claire, if you're reading this, someone has confused love with ownership. Jewelry has a strange way of revealing character. The honest admire its history. The greedy only see its price. I pray you never have to choose between family and self-respect. But if that day comes, choose yourself. You can forgive people without giving them another opportunity to hurt you. The collection was never meant to keep our family together. Love should have done that." By the time I reached the bottom of the page, my vision had blurred. Grace quietly handed me a tissue. "I told your mother she'd never need that letter." A sad smile crossed her face. "I've never been happier to be wrong." Nobody spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Martin cleared his throat. "There is one more issue." I looked up. Mark, I already knew. He contacted the buyer himself yesterday evening. "What?" "He demanded the remaining payment." I stared. "On what grounds?" "He claimed he was your legal representative." I couldn't even laugh. "He isn't." "I know." Martin slid another paper toward me. "The buyer refused." "What did Mark do?" "He became rather unpleasant." Grace couldn't help smiling. "That's putting it politely." Martin adjusted his glasses. "They informed him they were now cooperating with their legal department." I sat back. "So he knows. He knows the sale has stopped. And?" Martin looked directly at me. "He still doesn't know why." Just then, my phone buzzed. Mark. For a second, I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. "What?" His voice exploded through the speaker. "What the hell did you do?" "I just got a call from the jewelry company. They canceled everything. They're accusing Emily of fraud." People in the hallway probably heard every word. I kept my voice calm. "I haven't spoken to them." "Don't lie to me." "You really think I control their authentication process?" Silence. Then, "They said the collection wasn't authentic." I closed my eyes. There it was, the moment he'd finally realized things weren't going according to plan. "You've always been obsessed with paperwork," he snapped. "What did you do?" I looked down at my mother's letter. Then I answered. "I protected what my mother left me." "You set us up." "No, Mark." My voice remained almost painfully quiet. "You did that yourselves." He hung up. Grace reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Your mother always believed truth was patient. Martin nodded. And fortunately, he closed the file. So is the law. I thought the hardest part was behind me. I was wrong because before the week was over, Mark would come home, and he would expect me to forgive him. Mark came home 4 days later. Not because he wanted to, because Italy had become a very expensive place to stay once the credit card stopped working. I happened to be trimming the rose bushes in the front yard when his rental car pulled into the driveway. Our neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, was walking her golden retriever across the street. She gave me a little wave, completely unaware that my marriage had collapsed while she was visiting her grandchildren in Ohio. Life has a funny way of carrying on. Mark climbed out of the car wearing sunglasses and wrinkled linen clothes that had probably looked much better on the Amalfi Coast than they did standing in my driveway. He looked exhausted. Vanessa wasn't with him. I wasn't surprised. He rolled his suitcase toward me. Can we talk? I clipped another rose stem. I'm busy. Claire. No, he sighed. I flew home early. I know. I came to fix this. I finally looked at him. Did you? He hesitated. I made mistakes. I nodded. You certainly did. I wasn't thinking. No. His shoulders relaxed slightly, as though my calmness gave him hope. I knew you'd understand. That sentence hurt more than anything he'd said so far. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. For 15 years, I had understood. Every late night, every forgotten anniversary, every excuse, every broken promise, every time Vanessa somehow became part of our marriage. I had always found a reason to forgive him. He smiled weakly. I knew you'd calm down. I stared at him. There it is. What? The reason we're standing here. He frowned. I don't understand. You never expected consequences. His smile disappeared. I didn't think Emily would actually sell everything, he admitted. You told her it was family property. I was trying to make her feel included. You told her she could sell it. I didn't mean... You signed paperwork. I didn't know. You went on vacation with your ex-wife. His face flushed. It wasn't like that. I almost laughed. It never is. He stepped closer. Vanessa was going through a difficult time. So you decided to help. It wasn't planned. Really? I folded my gardening gloves carefully. Did the hotel accidentally reserve one room? His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. You don't know the whole story. I know enough. He followed me inside. The house looked different now. 2 days earlier, a locksmith had replaced every exterior lock. The security company had updated every access code. Martin had insisted. Mark noticed immediately. You changed the locks? Yes. You can't lock me out of my own house. It's my house. We're married. It was my house before we married. Silence. He knew I was right. The house had belonged to me for nearly a decade before Mark moved in. He'd never contributed to the mortgage. I'd never cared. Until now. He looked toward the dining room. Where's Emily? With friends. She won't answer my calls. Imagine that. Mark sat at the kitchen table exactly where Emily had been sitting 4 days earlier. For a moment, I remembered Thanksgiving dinners, birthday cakes, Christmas mornings. All those ordinary family moments I'd believed meant something permanent. He rubbed his forehead. I need your help. There it is. What? The real reason you came home. His voice became quieter. The jewelry company is threatening legal action. I know. They're saying Emily misrepresented ownership. She did. I signed what they gave me because I trusted her. No, I shook my head. You signed it because you believed there wouldn't be consequences. His eyes met mine. Claire? I'm not your emergency contact anymore." That afternoon, Martin arrived carrying a slim leather folder. Mark stood as soon as he saw him. "I don't need a lawyer." Martin smiled politely. "That's fortunate." He placed the folder on the table. "These aren't for negotiation." Mark looked down. Petition for dissolution of marriage, temporary financial orders, exclusive possession of residence. He looked back at me. "You already filed?" "Yesterday." "You couldn't even wait?" "I waited 15 years. The room became very still. Mark slowly lowered himself back into the chair. "I don't want a divorce." "You didn't seem worried about that in Italy." "It wasn't serious." "You spent 10 days traveling through Italy with your ex-wife." "It just happened." Martin finally spoke. "No, Mr. Bennett." His voice remained calm. "It required airline tickets, hotel reservations, passport information, restaurant bookings, and shared accommodations." A tiny smile touched Grace's lips. She had arrived with Martin, but remained quietly in the living room until now. Martin continued. "That is the longest spontaneous event I've encountered in 43 years of practicing law. For the first time since this nightmare began. Someone besides me found the situation absurd. Even I couldn't stop the corner of my mouth from lifting." Mark, however, wasn't amused. That evening my phone rang. Emily. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "Hello?" She was crying, real crying, not the dramatic kind she'd perfected as a teenager. "I didn't know." I closed my eyes. "I know." "No." Her breathing shook. "I really didn't." "What didn't you know?" "Dad told me," she whispered. "He said you kept the jewelry at home because you didn't trust us." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "He told me Mom deserved one nice trip after everything she'd been through." "And?" "He said..." She stopped again. "He said the collection would legally become his someday anyway." There it was, not an excuse, an explanation. Emily had believed a lie because the people she trusted most had told it. That didn't erase what she'd done, but it changed something inside me. For the first time, I stopped seeing a selfish 25-year-old. I saw a little girl who had spent years learning the wrong lessons from the wrong adults. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said quietly. "I can't answer that today." "I understand. I need time." "So do I." When the call ended, I stood alone in the kitchen for several minutes. Grace walked in carrying 2 mugs of tea. "You still love her." I looked out the window. "I don't know what I feel." Grace handed me 1 mug. "You don't have to choose today." I nodded slowly. "No, but I do have to choose something." "What?" I thought about my mother's letter, about the years I'd mistaken endless patience for love. Then I answered, "I have to choose where compassion ends." So, and boundaries begin. 3 months later, I found myself standing beneath the limestone columns of the Indianapolis Museum of Art. The museum's annual Heritage Gala had always been one of my mother's favorite events. She loved history, not because it was old, but because every object carried someone's story. Grace had spent weeks preparing the exhibition. She insisted I come. "I think your mother would have wanted you there." I wasn't sure I believed that, but I went anyway. Not for closure, just curiosity. The ballroom buzzed with quiet conversations. Men in dark suits, women in elegant dresses. Soft piano music drifted through the room while waiters carried trays of sparkling water and champagne. Across the gallery, glass display cases stood beneath carefully focused lights. Inside them, my mother's collection, or rather the original collection, Every piece looked exactly as I remembered: the emerald necklace, the sapphire bracelet, the diamond brooch, the pearl earrings she'd worn to my college graduation. For the first time since she'd died, I didn't feel grief. I felt gratitude. They had survived. Grace walked onto the small stage. At 72, she still had the posture of someone who had spent her life speaking in museums. She welcomed everyone before introducing the evening's featured exhibition, the Margaret Bennett collection. Applause filled the room. Grace smiled warmly. Margaret believed beautiful objects deserve honest stories. Tonight we're sharing both. She invited me onto the stage. I hadn't expected that. As I stepped forward, I noticed 3 familiar faces near the back. Mark, Emily, Vanessa. Apparently someone had told them about the gala. Vanessa folded her arms the moment our eyes met. Emily looked nervous. Mark simply looked tired. Grace continued. Many people see jewelry as wealth. She paused. Margaret saw memory. Large photographs appeared on the screen behind us. My mother wearing the sapphire bracelet, holding me at 8 years old, laughing beside my grandmother during Thanksgiving. The audience grew quiet. Then Grace displayed something else: the appraisal records. Every original piece, every microscopic photograph, every restoration, every identifying detail. She explained how serious collectors protect important heirlooms through documentation, insurance, and secure storage. Nothing sensational, just facts. Then Martin stepped onto the stage. He wasn't part of the museum staff, but everyone in the local estate planning community knew him. He adjusted the microphone. A few months ago, he began, someone attempted to sell what was believed to be this collection. The room became perfectly still. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa's confidence faded. Emily stared at the floor. Martin wasn't theatrical. He never had been. He simply explained the authentication process. When the jewelry buyer received the collection, they followed standard procedure: photographs, measurements, stone analysis, repair history, microscopic comparison. The documentation didn't match. The transaction stopped immediately. The buyer contacted the insurer. The insurer contacted Grace, exactly as the system was designed to do. No dramatic conspiracy, just professionals doing their jobs. Martin looked toward the display case. These safeguards don't exist because collectors expect betrayal. He paused. They exist because sometimes betrayal comes from the people least expected. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Then something happened I hadn't anticipated. The owner of the jewelry company stood from the audience. His name was David Kaplan. I recognized him from the paperwork Martin had shown me months earlier. Grace invited him forward. David smiled politely. I'd like to clarify one thing. He looked around the room. The replicas were extraordinary. A few people laughed softly. They fooled us, he smiled, for almost 20 minutes. More laughter, even I smiled. David continued. Whoever commissioned them wasn't trying to deceive buyers. He looked toward me. They were trying to protect family history while safely displaying it. Then he turned slightly toward the audience, and that decision worked exactly as intended. I noticed Emily wiping away tears. Not because she'd been embarrassed, because she finally understood. She hadn't sold my mother's legacy. She'd betrayed my trust. Those weren't the same thing. Mark slowly approached Martin. I couldn't hear every word, only fragments. Can we settle? Avoid court. Martin listened patiently, then he shook his head once. I'll discuss legal matters with Miss Bennett. Nothing more, nothing less. Vanessa walked straight toward me. I almost admired her confidence. Almost. She stopped an arm's length away. This is all your fault. I looked at her calmly. My fault? You set everyone up. No, you wanted us to fail. I wanted my mother's belongings to remain safe. She folded her arms. You always thought you were better than us. For years, that sentence would have started an argument. Tonight it only made me tired. I never thought that. Then why lock everything away? I glanced toward the display case. Because my mother asked me to protect them. Vanessa laughed bitterly. You chose jewelry over family. I met her eyes. No, I answered quietly. I chose honesty. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then walked away without another word. Emily remained where she was. Eventually she came over. I'm sorry. This time there were no excuses, no explanations, no blaming her father, no blaming Vanessa, just 2 words. I'm sorry. I believed her. That didn't mean everything could go back to the way it had been. Some things never do. I gently squeezed her hand. I hear you. Tears filled her eyes again. I don't expect anything else. She walked away, not rejected, not forgiven, just understood. As the evening came to an end, Grace stood beside me in front of my mother's collection. She smiled softly. Your mother once told me something. What was that? Beautiful jewelry doesn't reveal wealth. She looked toward the people leaving the ballroom. It reveals character. I looked through the glass at the sapphire bracelet. Then I thought about the empty cabinet I'd come home to months earlier. Strangely, I wasn't thinking about what had been taken anymore, only about what had survived. And for the first time in a very long while, that felt like enough. The divorce was finalized on a gray Tuesday morning in early November. It took less than 20 minutes. After everything that had happened, I expected fireworks. There weren't any. The judge reviewed the settlement, asked each of us a few routine questions, and signed the final order. Just like that, 15 years of marriage became a stack of papers. Mark never argued. He couldn't. The house had always been mine. My mother's inheritance had always been separate property. My business had never belonged to him. Martin had documented everything years before either of us imagined we'd end up in court. As we walked into the hallway, Mark caught up with me. Claire. I stopped. He looked older than he had just a few months earlier. Not physically, emotionally. People carry regret differently than they carry age. I really did love you. I believed him. That was the hardest part. I know, I said. His eyes searched mine. Then why couldn't we fix this? I thought about the question before answering. Because trust doesn't usually disappear all at once. He frowned. It leaves a little at a time. I gave him a sad smile. And by the time we notice it's gone, there isn't enough left to rebuild on. Neither of us spoke again. I walked away. He didn't follow. Emily called me the following weekend. Not to ask for money, not to ask for forgiveness. She asked if we could meet for breakfast. We chose a little place in Noblesville where we'd gone after her high school softball games years earlier. Some things hadn't changed. The cinnamon pancakes were still too big. The coffee was still stronger than it needed to be. Emily looked nervous the entire time. Finally, she reached into her purse and placed something on the table. The old Mother's Day card. The one I'd thought was lost forever. Best bonus mom ever. Purple marker, crooked hearts. I found it in Dad's attic. She looked down. I almost threw it away. I traced one finger lightly across the folded paper. What changed your mind? She swallowed. I realized... She paused. I spent years listening to people tell me who you were. Another pause. I never paid attention to who you actually were. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then she pushed a small envelope across the table. What's this? I sold my car. I looked inside. It was a cashier's check, $8,000. The exact amount she'd received as the advance payment. I can't take this. You have to. No, I need to do one honest thing. I looked at her, really looked. For the first time in years, I wasn't seeing Vanessa's influence. I was seeing the little girl who once waited with scraped knees outside her father's townhouse. I slid the envelope back. If you want to make things right, she nodded. Start building your own life. She blinked. What about the money? Keep it. I don't deserve it. No, I smiled gently, but you might deserve a second chance. She started crying again. This time, I hugged her, not because everything was fixed, because healing has to begin somewhere. Vanessa disappeared from our lives almost completely. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to Florida. Apparently, luxury vacations are easier to afford when someone else is paying. Mark rented a small apartment closer to his office. From what I heard, he kept mostly to himself. Once or twice he sent polite emails asking how I was doing. I wished him well, nothing more. That chapter of my life had closed. It didn't need to be reopened. A month before Christmas, Grace invited me back to the museum. The holiday crowds hadn't arrived yet. The galleries were almost empty. Together we stood in front of my mother's collection. The lights inside the display case reflected softly against the glass. Grace smiled. You know, what? Your mother worried those pieces would someday tear the family apart. I looked at the sapphire bracelet. They didn't. Grace raised an eyebrow. They revealed what was already broken. I laughed quietly. That sounds like something she'd say. Grace laughed too. It does, doesn't it? Before leaving, she handed me a small package. Inside was the old walnut music box from my study. I thought it belonged here, she said. No, I gently closed the lid. It belongs wherever I am. That Christmas morning, my house felt different. Smaller, quieter, peaceful. I opened the music box while snow drifted past the living room windows. The same gentle melody filled the room. Years earlier, I would have associated that tune with jewelry. Now, it reminded me of something far more valuable. My mother hadn't left me diamonds. She hadn't left me sapphires. She hadn't even left me a collection. She left me judgment, patience, and the courage to understand that loving people doesn't mean surrendering your self-respect. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for someone else is finally say no. Emily came over for dinner that afternoon. She brought homemade pumpkin pie. It wasn't very good. We laughed about it anyway. It wasn't the ending either of us expected. But it was honest. And after everything we'd been through, honesty was enough. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your own dignity, you probably know how lonely that decision can feel. I hope this story reminds you that setting healthy boundaries isn't the end of love. It may be the beginning of healing. Thank you for listening, and if this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.